Today, we're looking at a really fascinating stack of materials you've shared. We've got iconic Western film analysis, deep dives into cowboy language, and then this really stark history of an isolated Oregon fort.
It's an amazing combination. And our mission today really is to unpack the whole mythology of the Western. We're going to put that image of the rugged individualist, the one seeking justice on screen.
Usually through a revenge plot.
Exactly. We'll put that right up against the messy, complicated, and honestly surprisingly communal reality of the actual frontier.
Right. And just for context, we're mainly talking about the classic Western genre. So scholars usually set that between the California Gold Rush, 1849, and the closing of the frontier around 1890.
And that's the period that really established all those big themes: justice, freedom,
Individualism.
and that constant tension, right? The conflict between civilization creeping in and the raw wilderness. What's really interesting, though, as our sources point out, is that the vengeance story isn't some modern invention. Frank Gruber, the classic Western writer, he actually identified it as one of the 7 basic plots.
One of the foundations.
Yeah, the absolute archetype. A wronged person has to go on this elaborate chase for retribution. It's baked into the genre's DNA.
So if revenge is the engine, why do the sources seem to hold up films with more of a moral dilemma, like that transition subgenre?
Yeah.
Why are those seen as more important than just a good old-fashioned shootout?
Well, because vengeance gives you a very clean, immediate satisfaction. It's emotionally simple. But the genre is always trying to grow. I mean, you think about High Noon from 1952.
Right.
Marshall William Kane has to make this profound choice. Does he abandon his town, his new wife, and save himself? Or does he stay and face the outlaw, Frank Miller?
So the conflict is internal, not just physical.
Exactly. It shifts from a chase to this philosophical question of duty and cost. That's what defines that subgenre. It asks what bravery really is.
And yet, that desire for just, pure, satisfying revenge is, well, it's irresistible. You see it in everything from spaghetti westerns like Navajo Joe
Where he's avenging his whole tribe.
to amazing modern takes like The Harder They Fall. I mean, a fictional story, but inspired by real people like Nat Love and Rufus Buck, finally bringing some real diversity into the spotlight.
And then you get films that actually question the whole premise, which is pretty revolutionary. Your source brings up Hanny Calder from 1971.
Oh, with Raquel Welch.
Yeah. Her character wants revenge after she's attacked, but her mentor, a bounty hunter, keeps warning her again and again, this isn't going to make you feel better.
And that's the part that really stays with you, right?
Yeah.
Most Westerns, they end when the villain is dead, the ledger is clear.
Yeah.
But Hanny Calder goes past that moment. She gets her revenge, and she realizes he was right. The act itself just leaves this void. It's an intellectual takedown of the whole myth.
It forces you to think about the aftermath, which is what most revenge films they cut away from. And that brings us perfectly to a film that takes this idea of retribution and pain and just pushes it into the absolute darkest corner of the genre.
Clint Eastwood's 1973 film, High Plains Drifter.
Yep.
This one is genuinely bizarre. I mean, it's so violent. It's almost a horror movie wearing a cowboy hat.
It really is. The setup, it seems simple enough at first. This unnamed stranger rides into the mining town of Lago.
A place that you immediately know is corrupt.
Oh, completely cowardly. He kills 3 gunmen with no effort, and the town council, who are terrified because the real outlaws are coming back.
Stacy Bridges and the Carlin brothers.
They hire him for protection.
But their panic, it's all rooted in this awful secret they're trying to keep buried.
Precisely. The town of Laco, they found out their gold mine was illegal, and the U.S. Marshal, Jim Duncan, he was about to shut them down.
So they hired the outlaws.
They hired Bridges and his gang to murder the marshal. And then, to avoid paying them, they framed the outlaws for other crimes. So the stranger they just hired to protect them, he's actually there to prosecute them.
And the punishment he delivers is so symbolic. He doesn't just kill them. He completely humiliates the community.
He does. The demands are sadistic, and they all point to the film's big, ghostly twist. He makes the town's dwarf, Mordecai, the man they all mock.
He makes him both the sheriff and the mayor.
Yeah, forcing them all to submit to him. But the biggest tell is when he forces them to paint every single building in town blood red.
Painting the town red. It's like,
Oh.
like preparing it for some kind of ritual.
That is exactly the feeling. And when he makes the sign painter rename the town to Hell, it's basically confirmation. This is not a human character. He's driven by something supernatural.
The sources all point to one interpretation. He's the ghost of Marshal Jim Duncan.
Right. He's come back for the just and then was denied.
And the film gives you all the clues. This stranger has these dreams or memories of Duncan being whipped to death while the whole town just stood by and watched.
Watched and did nothing. And renaming the town Hell echoes Duncan's last words, his curse on them.
Then that final scene. The stranger just rides off and vanishes into the heat haze.
His work is done. He can move on.
And you see Mordecai carving Duncan's name on his unmarked grave. He asks the stranger his name, and the reply is just, "Yes, you do." The ghost has settled his account.
It's a terrifying but, definitive end to a revenge story.
Okay, so we have the myth of the West defined by violence, by the crack of a bullet, and the spectral silence of the stranger. But what about the sound of the real West? The actual language? Was it as rich as the mythology?
It was incredibly rich, but for very practical reasons. We're going from the ghost's silence to the really loud, creative slang of the uneducated cowboy. Ramon Adams, he observed that because these men didn't have a formal education, their language had to be vivid. They used metaphors drawn right from their daily life, from the animals, the weather, everything.
They had some great ways to describe people. A petty, small-minded guy was just a 10-cent man.
Perfect.
And if you were an annoying, nonstop talker, a blatherskite. We should definitely bring that one back.
Oh, absolutely. And an eccentric person was a queer fish. The language for hardship was just as good. A man who was totally broke.
Didn't have a tail feather left.
It's such a great image, like a bird just stripped bare.
Or if you look totally exhausted and ragged, you rode hard and put up wet.
Which is just a great piece of shorthand. It's from, putting a horse away when it's still hot and sweaty without caring for it properly.
And the language could be violent, too. Getting thrown from your horse was to chew gravel.
So visceral. And the commands were just as vivid. If you wanted someone to shut up, you'd tell them to hobble your lip.
Treating their mouth like a horse that needs to be tied up.
Exactly.
What about the ultimate compliment, though? Finding someone you could really rely on.
That was someone to ride the river with. It implies deep trust, shared risk. And that rich language is such a contrast to the very specific manufactured sounds that define the genre on screen.
Especially the music of spurs.
Oh, yeah.
That sound is everything. It announces the hero before he even says a word. But how does a tool from ancient Rome become the signature sound of the American West?
It's a pretty remarkable journey. The sound itself comes from the spinning rowel. That little toothed wheel. Sometimes they'd add jingle bobs to make it even louder.
But the history goes back to Caesar. That's incredible.
It is. It just speaks to the long history of horsemanship. Even that phrase, earn your spurs, that comes from the Middle Ages.
I had no idea.
Yeah, gold or gilded spurs were reserved for knights. You had to achieve that rank to wear them. By the 1800s, the U.S. cavalry had just adopted them as standard uniform, carrying that ancient tradition right onto the frontier.
So when a writer or a sound designer is trying to capture that moment, that hero walking into a saloon, the sound of his boots is critical. But the source material says it's a huge dilemma.
It's a total writer's dilemma because it's so context-dependent. It's all about the materials. A stiff, hard-heeled leather boot makes a very different sound from a soft one.
And the surface it hits.
The surface changes everything. Hardwood, dirt, a stone floor. The onomatopoeia is all over the place, from a sharp clack-tap to a heavy clump. Sometimes it's better to just describe the feeling of the sound, Its weight, its threat.
So we've gone from this mythic, ghostly revenge to the very real, colorful language of the cowboy. Let's shift now to the quiet, grinding reality of the frontier. We're leaving Hollywood behind and heading to the Columbia Plateau, to Fort Dalles, Oregon.
Which was abandoned in 1867. And really the main reason people went to these harsh places was government policy. You have the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, which provided the actual transportation link. It made the journey possible for millions.
And the incentive was just monumental. The Homestead Act, same year, 1862. The promise was lands for the landless.
Right.
You could claim 160 acres for a $10 filing fee. As long as you lived there and improved it for 5 years straight,
Yeah.
the psychological pull of that must have been immense.
It was. And Fort Dalles itself has this amazing connection to a figure that really grounds the whole myth and reality. Ulysses S. Grant,
He was there.
he visited as a junior officer in 1852, and he saw the struggle of the immigrants who had just barely survived the Oregon Trail.
And he used that not as a military man, but as an entrepreneur. It's so strange to think of the future president trying to flip cattle for cash.
It totally grounds the legend. He used the town as a market hub. He would buy oxen and cattle from the immigrants who were too poor or exhausted to care for them anymore,
And his plan?
fatten them up over the winter, and sell them for a profit to the military posts. He was really financially desperate at the time, just trying to make some money outside his tiny army salary.
That struggle just to survive, that's the real American experiment on the frontier. It forced all these incredibly diverse cultures, settlers from the East, European immigrants, Native American groups, to interact.
And this is where you see Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis in action. The frontier creating a composite nationality. All the old world customs, the Victorian manners people brought with them, they were challenged immediately by sheer necessity.
You see that so clearly in Willa Cather's novel.
Yeah.
Jim Burden's family at first looks down on Antonia's bohemian family. The prejudice was everywhere.
But the conditions just overwhelm custom. Antonia herself is the perfect example. After her father's suicide, she becomes a laborer, she plows fields, she works outside, just shattering that Victorian ideal of female domesticity.
She had to.
She had to. The frontier didn't care about social norms. It only cared about work and survival.
And speaking of survival, we have to talk about the medical care at a place like Fort Dalles. It's the ultimate terrifying contrast to a clean Hollywood shootout death.
Right. I mean, what was army medicine like in the 1850s? It was brutally primitive. They had no idea about germ theory, no antibiotics.
It wasn't bullets that were the biggest killer.
No, not at all. It was disease. Contagion was this constant, invisible, terrifying enemy for both soldiers and settlers.
Dr. Joseph Billick Brown was the post surgeon there from 1856 to 1859, the kind of surgery he would have practiced.
This
It's just medieval to us.
It is. The Civil War, which was right around the corner, really highlights the grim reality. Amputation was often the only choice to stop an infection.
I saw the number in the source material. Something like 60,000 amputations during the war.
60,000. And men like Dr. Brown, their primary tool was the bone saw. Now, they did have anesthesia, chloroform, or ether was relatively new, so they could mitigate some of the agony.
But the infection would set in anyway.
It was a race against an enemy you couldn't see. It makes the idea of a clean, heroic death in a duel seem just completely fantastical compared to dying slowly from typhoid or gangrene.
So by 1867, Fort Dalles is abandoned. The buildings just decay. But one structure remains standing, the surgeon's quarters. And this is where the story shifts again, from military use to community preservation.
It's a great chapter, and it really highlights the role women played in civic life. In the early 1900s, the pioneer women of the Dalles, specifically a group called the Cirrhosis Society, they launched a campaign to save the building.
And they succeeded. They got Congress to deed the structure to the Oregon Historical Society. And in 1905, they opened the Fort Dalles Museum, one of the first history museums in Oregon.
And what's so fascinating is the building itself. It's a beautiful example of Gothic revival architecture.
Which seems very out of place for the Oregon frontier.
It was a deliberate choice. The design was adapted from a plan by Andrew J. Downing, a famous Eastern architect. It was the military trying to impose this civilized, Eastern, quaint Victorian aesthetic onto the rugged landscape.
And what does that museum show us today? What can you learn about life back then?
You get the tangible proof of the struggles. You see pioneer memorabilia, actual Oregon Trail relics, wagon parts, Bibles that made the journey. You see military artifacts, including this massive 36-star American flag that local women commissioned and sewed in 1868 for Grant's presidential campaign.
So it's about community action, not lone heroes.
Way more than any lone sheriff, yeah. And then you see the reality of travel. You go to the Anderson barn and see the vehicle collection.
A huge contrast to the hero on horseback.
Powerful contrast. You see the sheer scale and difficulty of it all. An ox-drawn freight wagon, a Conestoga wagon, even an old hearse. It reminds you that real life on the frontier was slow. It was measured by the pace of an ox, not the speed of a movie horse chase.
We've really spanned the whole West here. From the spectacular, ghostly revenge of Clint Eastwood through the rich, practical slang of the cowboy, and we've landed on the gritty, real history of life, disease, and quiet community effort in Oregon.
And if you connect it all back to how the genre works, you realize the Western is obsessed with the physical duel, the shootout, the one man changing history in a single moment. But if the frontier was really closed by cultures having to merge, by women defying norms to work, by people just having the sheer willpower to survive pre-germ theory medicine, what hidden non-violent acts of determination, of labor, of just collective effort were the truest forms of bravery?
That is something to think about long after the credits roll.